national advocacy group for people with Down syndrome, and we were established in 1979. We're a resource center for children and adults with Down syndrome for parents, professionals, self-advocates, and other interested individuals. NDSS envisions a world in which all people with Down syndrome have the opportunity to enhance their quality of life, realize their aspirations, and become valued members of welcoming communities. And we believe that education, specifically inclusive education, is a great way to start this journey. So today's topic is preparing for the IEP, and like Colleen said, there's going to be myself, Sarah Jo, who is the NDSS Tayshoff Inclusive Education Fellow. We have Robin Lyons, who's the president and co-founder of Wisconsin Upside Down. She's also an amazing member of our NDSS Inclusive Education Task Force, and she's also an NDSS ambassador. Then we're also lucky enough to have Betsy, who is the first student in New Jersey to be fully included through school, and she's also a member of our NDSS Inclusive Education Task Force. So what is an IEP? So before we even get started, we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page with what an IEP is. So an IEP is an Individualized Education Plan, and it is a right guaranteed to students who qualify under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or commonly known as IDEA. It is a legal document outlining measurable goals, accommodations, or modifications, which are different state to state, but that is another topic. And these modifications and adaptations are things that will allow the student to gain access to the general education curriculum. So Colleen is going to put out a short survey. There's just 2 questions. Are you preparing for your first IEP? And then what is the age of the child who you're preparing for? And we have a few age ranges, and that'll just help us sort of gauge how this webinar. It's really great for everyone, but also specifically for first-time parents, first-time webinar, or first-time IEP attenders. So we'll give everyone a few minutes to do that.
All right, this is Colleen. Sarah Jo, I don't know if you can see this, but we have 40% yes and 60% said no.
Perfect. Good. That gives us sort of a good understanding of our audience for at least who's live today. So we're going to, I'll go ahead and close out, or Colleen, if you could close, oh, it's already closed the poll, and then we will get on with the information.
Did we get information on the age of the people preparing for an IEP? Did that come through?
Oh, it looks like we're just opening up that one now.
Okay.
I'll give just another about 10 seconds for those of you to answer that question. So it looks like about 75% of our attendees are in the 3 to 8 range, 25, and then we sort of have the rest of the 25% spread out through the other, sort of evenly throughout every other age range. Going all the way up to 18 plus. So thank you for participating in that.
Well, that's great. Then this is Robin Lyons, and I'm president, as you heard, of Wisconsin Upside Down. The reason I'm on today with you is I actually do a program called Surviving the IEP. I sit in on IEP meetings as an advocate throughout the state of Wisconsin, and I've been doing it for quite a while, very successfully getting children with Down syndrome and other disabilities back into the classroom which is really our overall goal, to provide inclusive education for people with Down syndrome. So today we're going to be talking about preparing for the IEP and why you are the resident expert. And although not all of you are on, as a matter of fact, 60% of you are not on your first IEP, this is going to be one of those things where you slap yourself on the forehead and said, oh, I didn't do that, or yeah, I'm doing this right. We're talking specifically about preparing to go into that meeting. We're not going to step into the meeting at this webinar. We'll do that in the next ones, but this is how you prepare for a really successful IEP meeting. And we're also going to have a document that can follow your child through school, which will be a really beneficial tool for your IEP meetings. We're going to be talking about the fact that you really need to prepare, that it doesn't happen overnight. I can't tell you the number of calls I get from people the night before an IEP meeting in a panic, and there's really not much I can do at that point. So you do need to prepare ahead of time. Before you go into the IEP meeting, before you prepare, think about the vision you have for your child too. What do you want to see your child doing in the future? What do you think they'd be successful at? Doesn't matter how young or how old, I'm sure you have dreams for your child in the future. And we want to put that into writing. And the third, really the most important part of what we're going to do today is give your child a voice, because their story and their opinion is really the most important opinion when it comes to an IEP meeting. We're going to talk about preparing for the IEP. We're going to create an education template for you. It's going to clearly spell out your wishes, something that you can send. I always suggest you send it to everyone in advance of the IEP. That way they know where you're coming from and they're prepared to answer you when they get into that meeting. I don't want you to forget about behavior. So many parents, especially, now this is especially for families who are going into the IEP for the first time, because behavior can mean something different to families that have been through the IEP before. But I'm talking about behaviors that you know what your child's behavior is. There are certainly parents and that are going to say, you know, I'm really worried that my child's going to have a problem in school because I don't know that their behavior is good behavior for a classroom. Don't try to sugarcoat that and hide that in this meeting. It's really important that if you think there could be a problem, that we work ahead and put a plan into place for that behavior. And that'll be something we can talk about in further webinars, but it's a really important aspect that sometimes parents try to hide a behavior. We want to be forthright, very honest in everything we do to prepare for the IEP. And then you'll be ready to go. By the time, if you do the steps that we talk about here, and you know that you're the resident expert on your child, you're going to be great going into that IEP meeting. And we're going to come back to that. Resident expert on your child, resident expert on your child. So many times when I walk into an IEP meeting, typically the first thing that happens is everyone gets introduced, and there may be quite a few people in that room. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And when it gets to mom and dad, they'll say, well, I'm just Joey's mom. I'm just Sarah's dad. But you're not just a dad or just a mom. First of all, that is something to be incredibly proud of when you have a child with Down syndrome. But also, you're the resident expert on that child. There is nobody that knows your child other than maybe your spouse. No one knows that child as well as you do. And so you are the person they should go to when they have questions about your child. Not only that, chances are you're also going to be the resident expert in that room on Down syndrome. No matter how much or how little you know about Down syndrome, it's probably more than anyone else sitting in that room. So you need to present yourself in that way. So let's get going. Are you ready? We're going to join a party. I want you to think back. Last time you did a party for your kids, we've all done them, right, at some point. And this is actually my daughter's 11th birthday party at our house. Lots of decisions went into this. I talked to her and she chose a theme. There's a lot of things you have to decide about. So she went with a cowboy theme. We had to decide where we were going to do it. You know, do I have to clean the house up? Yeah, I did. She wanted it at home. We had to decide what kind of food we were going to serve. She picked out her cake, what kind of games we would play, who to invite. She invited her whole class and they all showed up. What kind of favors we were going to pass out, decorations, when were the invites going out. A lot of steps, and it took a long time for us to really plan this party. Now I want you to think about those of you who have been through the IEP process before. Did you put as much thought and time and effort into planning your last IEP that you did to go into that birthday party? And if the answer is no, we're going to work on making that right. So we can go on. There we are. All right. So we're going to have an ingredient list, right? You might have an ingredient list for your cake or maybe for that party. We're going to make this ingredient list what we're going to gather for our to plan this party, our IEP. And what I want you to start with is something to put all of this information into and keep it in one place. Don't throw it in a pile or in separate piles. And when the time comes, you have to look over the house, all over the house for it. Keep a file specifically for the IEP. So you may have to make copies of things that you have in other places. And I would suggest either a binder. I personally like an organizer, like one of those accordion organizers, because I like to make multiple copies of each of the documents. So if I need to take something out and cite it during the meeting, I can actually pass a copy on to everyone. And this is going to be not just academic information, but we're going to be looking at therapeutic information, medical information, and anecdotal information. And I don't want to forget, again, behavior. If there are behavior things that need to be addressed in the IEP, make sure that comes up, make sure that we're addressing it. So we're going to look at these different types of information you can gather. And the first thing we're going to suggest is evaluations and assessments. So we're looking at, so even if it's your very first IEP, you might be looking at early childhood information or assessments that have come out. If this isn't your first IEP, you may be looking at assessments of your child that were done every 3 years. They're typically done, and you would want to have that kind of information. Also, any test scores, how they're doing in their classes now. So that's that first educational component. Have copies of that information handy. Therapeutic information. So this is evaluations and assessments done by your OT, your PT, maybe you have a developmental therapist. These are any of the therapists that might be working with your child and any written evaluations that they have had. Same goes for medical. Their latest checkup. Is there a medical a history that's important to this IEP? Certainly a child with celiac disease, that's important information to pass on. First of all, the teachers and the staff may not understand celiac disease and what that means. A lot of times for these first IEPs, we see kids in a preschool setting or elementary setting, and they'll have these sensory tables, and gosh, there's my daughter with celiac disease playing in a pasta bowl. You know, we want to make sure those things don't happen. Or maybe they have a hearing difficulty. Or maybe they, I had a family whose child, they don't sweat. So that's important information, because sometimes those kids go out into hot areas, and we need to make sure that everyone will be watching out for that child's safety. And then anecdotal information, stories that have been told that maybe you weren't there and the therapist shared something that your child did. Or maybe a teacher or a doctor, they have information that might be beneficial for the teachers and all of the people that are in that IEP room, in this team working to do the best for your child. So that's all important information. Write down that anecdotal information. Get in the habit of writing it down when you hear it. At the end of the day, say, oh yeah, I was talking to my neighbor and she said, you know, Joey did this today. That was so cool. I want to write that down to remember it. Then professional recommendations. Again, these are professional education, therapeutic, and medical recommendations. If one of these three sets of people recommend additional learning or additional work for your child, well, that's incredibly important in an IEP setting. And parents are the expert on this child. Your information about how you think your child learns the best is very important. Say your child always learns things when you put it into a song. Maybe your child learns best when they see it or touch it. This kind of information is invaluable to the teachers that will be working with your child. Is there a therapeutic fashion that works better for your child and something that your child resists? You know better than anything what your child is willing to do and not willing to do. And then what are your concerns for medical care of your child? Is there medical care that you'd like to see happen at school? Do you want to make sure that there's Tylenol available for your child? Do you want to make sure that if they have allergies, there's an allergy med or sunscreen? Those are all things that you know as the expert on your child, and you need to tell them during that IEP meeting. And of course, we always go back to this anecdotal information. Your child's opinion. So maybe they're not old enough yet to say a whole lot. Maybe they don't speak yet, but I bet Butts, you know how they feel about things. If they're not old enough to state their feelings, you should state it for them. And this is really important. Again, always putting things into writing. If they feel strongly about something, you make sure the school knows that. And then what do other people say? Other people that are seeing your child on a day-to-day basis in other areas. Maybe it's the conversation they had with the teller at the bank, or how they like to order their own food at McDonald's. And how people come back to you and say things like, oh, wow, your daughter, your son speaks so well, or could you help me understand them? I'm not quite catching what they say. That kind of anecdotal information, also very important. And now we're going to go on to what I think is really the most important, and that is the vision, well, next to their dreams, your dreams. So we're going to set up a vision for your child. All of this is going to go into writing, and it's all going to fit into an all about me page that will follow your child through school. Again, just like the IEP, this is going to change each year. You'll adjust it and change what you think, but this is a place to start. You want to know about who is your child, how do they relate to others, their peers and adults. Really put into writing how you feel about your child and what type of person they are. What are their strengths? What are the very best things about your child? Maybe they have great empathy for others. Maybe they're just always happy and smiling. Maybe they're a little shy, but it's thoughtful. They're thoughtful about everyone around them. Tell those strengths. What is really easy for your child? And then Sarah threw this last one in. And Sarah, where you got this from a professor you worked with?
Yeah, so I vividly remember my junior year of college sitting in Dr. Julie Costin's class, who many of us know as really the queen of inclusive education. And she said, make sure you ask parents to describe a moment when your child surprised you. And why this is important is because parents often are the ones who presume competence the most. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be things that in the back of our heads we're saying, oh, we don't really know if this is going to be possible, or how are we going to do this? So ask, describe a moment when you were like, wow, I never thought that this would be able to happen, and it is. Whether that's academic, whether that's they went over across the room to help another child who fell without prompting, whether that's making friends, whatever it is, describe a moment that surprised you because it was something that you never thought would happen.
I think that's really important. I actually did that in my last IEP. I drank the Kool-Aid early on and believed that my daughter was competent and could do anything. And she is now in 9th grade. And even though I just always believed and I always pushed that I wanted her to go to college and I wanted her to be able to do all these different things, I also at the same time always heard these stories about how kids with Down syndrome just can't do math. And I guess I kind of sort of bought into that, and but I never told anybody. But I'm going to tell you, she's coming home with her 9th grade algebra in a regular class and sitting down and doing her homework by herself. And that's something that has surprised me and I find very exciting. And I shared that in her last meeting with teachers because I think that tells all of us maybe we need to push her more because she's gone beyond where I thought she could go. So there's so many different stories like that. I know one time I had a neighbor call me about my son telling me how amazing it was that he was taking care of a child down the street who had a disability, that he went right up and started talking to her. And the mother just hadn't had that kind of situation before. Most of the kids just kind of ignored her child. And my son just went up and became her friend. And my son also has a disability. So this was a child with a disability doing something that we didn't expect because he has a disability where he most of the time wouldn't walk up to somebody like that. And then what are the challenges for your child? And this is where I really want you to be honest. What is hard? What kind of assistance do they need? Do they have trouble? You know, my son has terrible ADHD. He had a terrible time trying to contain himself in a classroom. Don't try to ignore those things. Make sure you're being very honest and open. And then what are your dreams for your child? What do you see in their future? I said from the time my child was going into early childhood classes at her very first IEP that my goal was that she was going to learn academics and that she was going to go to college. And now it's really exciting because when we sit in IEP meetings now, she says, well, I want to go to college. I want to be a dental hygienist. She knows what she wants to do. And I think that when you shoot for the stars, your child shoots for the stars. And you're making a really important statement that you want academics here. That's my goal for this child. My goal with my child was that she go to college, and that I want her to have a job someday, and I'd like her to live independently. And so everything that we've ever done in our IEP has been to get her towards that goal. Not every family is going to have the same goals that I have. These were just mine. So what are your goals? What do you see for the future of your child? And now, I think one of the most important things is that big picture. Not only what you see for the child in their future, but as they get older, they should be able to say it for themselves. So we're going to introduce Betsy, and she's going to talk about her own vision.
Hi, just let you know it's me. I was very excited to get into my adult life and to get into my community. Going through high school and beyond, I know I wanted to get a job and live on my own. Now I have a paid job at the YMCA, and I live by myself. Now looking into the future, I'm prepared to take care of my mom, who is in her 80s, just like she cared for me growing up. If you do not know your destination, you will not know how to get there. Graduating with peers, attending college, living independently, meaningful employment, and getting married. Child's empire for a child, for advocate for his or herself. Growing up, my mom, I fought very hard for me to be included in school, going to IEP meetings and making sure I was included. Because she did that, I know I have a voice to advocate for myself and others. I even spoke at Syracuse University Leadership Institute on inclusion this summer. I think it's really important for you to help your child to find their voice.
And I can't reiterate that enough. Thank you, Betsy. You are so right. We're going to go on to something called the All About Me page, and this is a page that will follow your child through school. And then the All About Me page is broken into 3 sections, but the most important section is that section on the left. And we have a cartoon picture, but in reality, you would have a nice big picture of your child here, and a statement from your child. For those of you where your children are very young and you're just starting out, this would be you putting their wishes into words. But as your child gets older, this really should be written by them with your help, and eventually by them alone. And each year it's going to change a little bit, but it's going to be really very important. So this is a page that, and it doesn't print really nicely on these slides, so you'll be able to see what these really look like better afterwards as a resource. But we're going to show you how to put one of these together. So we're going to go to the side that was on the left. And this is underneath the photo, and it's the letter from the student. So you're going to put into words what's important to that student. And this is obviously a young child, 5 years old, and she's saying that she lives with her parents and what she likes to play with, who her favorite toys are. And it's really a great clue. And the reason this is important is it's a great chance for teachers to see, and therapists, how they might be able to reach out to your child, especially if it's the first time they've worked with your child. Man, if I was going to be working with that child for the first time, I'd be looking for a Peppa Pig, because Mom told me that Peppa Pig is so important to this child. I have a young man who just loved fire trucks. He actually had some behavioral problems, so the teacher went out and got a little box together with fire trucks and some dress-up clothes. And when that child was meeting the daily goals for behavior and doing really well, she would give him some time to go get into that special box with things that were just there to encourage him. Here, our friend Cindy loves to read books. These are all things that are important for a teacher to know, and that, you know, the goal is that maybe that child, and actually this child did say she wanted to learn how to count to 100. So we put that in her letter to go to the teacher, so they had an idea what was important to her. I probably more often than not, especially for young children, see that they ask about being invited to birthday parties and making friends. This is a great place to put that, because the teachers and therapists can facilitate those friendships and help your child in those early years of school. So this is a great tool for all those people in the room that have never met your child before or haven't spent a lot of time with them before, for them to really see your child. I always suggest that your child is in the room for the IEP. Depending on their age, they may just be in at the very beginning, just for a few minutes, and then be taken out. And as soon as they're old enough to stay in there and participate, they really should be. It sets up a trust that your child understands that you're all there to help them and not just to be talking about them. So this is a very important part. Sarah will go over the next section of this page.
Yeah. So the next section was the section on the right, and this is just some basic information overview, which is parents' names, address, email, phone number. We also want to have medical history, and you can see that we bolded some key things. So, for instance, vision issues. So that's going to be something that myself as a teacher is going to need to know, so that I can adjust my content and my accommodations accordingly. Also, you know, sensory integration. These are things, and you want to have both current and past, such as open heart surgery, which many of our students have. The gluten-free diet, really important, you know, when it's someone's birthday, so that we're not just handing a cupcake that someone, you know, graciously brought in for everyone, but that is going to have these adverse effects on our students. We also want to have current therapies, speech, PT, OT, and then any other special ed resources, such as team collaboration, vision charts, and schedules. It's also another great point to add in strengths, and then some challenges.
And those things are important too, especially, you know, when I look at the medical history, it really can kind of take some of the guesswork out, and it's a great time to bring up things like, okay, does your school let families bring in snacks? If they do, is there a place where we could keep some special snacks for my child? I know I personally have a child who eats gluten-free, and we always had some cupcakes in a freezer at the school, so if other children were bringing something in, my daughter wasn't left out. So this is an opportunity to maybe bring those kind of things up to your school. And this is the letter from the parents. Now I'm going to tell you the letters that you're looking at, the parts of this letter you're looking at are a real letter that a parent wrote. This is a real thing. We just changed names to Cindy Sue and Kelly Sue and Susie Sue and all those names we threw in there. You may not be this eloquent as this parent is. I mean, this parent, I think, did a really beautiful a letter. Our vision for Cindy is that she becomes a solid student and independent thinker with good self-esteem. Ultimately, the beliefs held in Cindy's heart will determine the path her life takes. With one approach, Cindy could easily be a child who constantly looks outside herself and to others for help and direction, because she acts only by command, looks for reasons why things can't work or can't be done, and is enslaved by her own limiting self-beliefs as they have come to her through others. But our hope is that with the right positive support at home and in school, Cindy can become an individual who looks for ways to make things work and get things done, who's encouraged to believe that each person can do their share, and holds a belief that she has talents and abilities that are important to share and are respected by others. So I want you to have some sort of a vision statement like that. It may be as simple as, you know, our vision for Cindy is that she is going to get academics in school, that she's going to learn to the best of her ability, that she's going to go on to high school and then to college and have a job and live independently someday. It doesn't have to be as beautifully written as this letter is. And the next section, I usually suggest in your second paragraph that you kind of talk about what you'd like to see happen at school. So if this is your first IEP, and this one was particularly written by a young student, parent of a young student, they wanted to make sure she has math and reading goals. They had heard from other parents going into the school that they often left those things out of the IEP. They wanted to make sure that they were looking for the core standards in this child's IEP. Talk about your therapies that you're getting now. If you don't think your child's getting enough therapy, or if you think they're getting just the right amount and you want to continue that amount, especially when they're transitioning, say, from early childhood to elementary school, or as they go on in elementary school, so often the schools try to cut back on therapies. If you have a belief that your child needs more or to keep the same level, put that in here and then say why, you know, so make sure that you're backing up your claim there. And then I really can't say enough about that bottom phrase, we promise to continue to reinforce the skills she's learning at school. It's really important that you're asking a lot of the school and everyone in that room that you make sure they understand you're a team player too. I ask the parents to say and promise that they too are going to take the time. Sometimes you're tired at the end of the day, but they're going to take the time to do that homework with that child and make sure they're reinforcing what they're learning at school. And Betsy's going to go back through a checklist of what goes on that All About Me page.
Child's picture, basic info, child's name, age, parents, names, parents, contacts, info. Letter from student, medical history, current therapist, other service, child's strengths, challenges, a note from the parents, and vision of your child. Is this me, Sarah?
Nope, I think this is Sarah. Are you there, Sarah? She may be muted. I can go on to this. This is about who might be at that IEP meeting. While we find Sarah, I'll just go, and Sarah, you chime in when you get back on. There is quite a group that's at the IEP meeting, and sometimes this can be intimidating to parents. So we want you to understand who's there and why. And again, this is why you are the resident expert, because you are just as important as all of these people in the meeting. There may be, there'll be the parents and guardians of your child. There will be your child or your self-advocate superstar like Betsy. General educators, special educators, and you may have one or you may have several. The school district representative, and sometimes you'll have more than one. That may be a principal, superintendent, the special education director, or the school psychologist. There could be a representative from a local education agency. And therapists, they're almost always there. Your speech language therapist, your physical therapist, and occupational therapist. And your advocate. And I can't say enough about how important it is, if you can, to have an advocate present at your IEP. Sarah Jo, are you back?
Yes, thank you so much, Robin. Can you hear me?
We can.
Perfect. I'm so sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. So as we said, Robin stressed the importance to have an advocate. And as you saw from the list of people, there's going to be a lot of people at IEP meetings. And so we want to make sure that you as a parent feel comfortable, and that's why we really encourage you to have an advocate, whether that's a friend, a family member. A lot of local Down syndrome organizations have an advocate on hand, and there's also professional advocates such as myself. You know, even if you're not to the point where it's okay, it's your first IEP, we're not ready to call him Sarah Jo, but you just want someone there, it's really good to have a more objective view of the IEP, and sometimes they'll catch things that you didn't because there's so many people talking and there's so much information being thrown out there. So we really encourage you to bring your advocate with you.
And I'd like that, Sarah, especially those of you who've been through the IEP process in the past, if there's ever something that's kind of a bone of contention with you and your IEP team, that's especially a good time to have an advocate. I know parents that have sometimes become very emotional, and sometimes IEPs aren't done as well as they could be done, and it's easy to get emotional. Any of you that have been through early child or birth to 3 evaluations, when they tend to focus on all the things your child can't do, you know, at some point you just have that rushing in your head and that's all you can hear because you're becoming emotional. That's when it's really beneficial to have that advocate or friend that can kind of bring you down, or that when you talk about it later is able to say, oh, maybe you missed this, or I didn't see it that way. I kind of felt like they were saying that. Just kind of levels that playing field.
Absolutely, Robin. So at IEP meetings often, I can't tell you how many times I've left IEP meetings with parents and they've said, I have no idea what anything that was being said was. So there are a lot of acronyms in special education, and we really encourage you to get familiar with them. This is a great sheet to put in your binders or your accordion folders. So a few common acronyms that you're going to hear is BIP, which is a behavior intervention plan, FAPE, free and appropriate public education, FBA, which is a functional behavioral assessment, IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, LRE, which is the least restrictive environment, OTPT, occupational therapy, physical therapy, SP or SLP, speech language pathologist. So you really want to make sure if you're going in for the first time or you've had experiences where the people from the school are throwing around these terms and you can't follow, you know, put them on a sticky note, put them on a piece of paper, highlight them. If you really want to make sure that the school district is giving you the least restrictive environment, highlight LRE on your page so that you remember to bring that up, or that you are looking for it as the school district representatives are speaking. So some additional resources, because we couldn't cover all the acronyms that, you know, we could do a whole hour webinar on acronyms alone. So we have a few different websites that have really a great compilation of the acronyms. We also have a suggested reading that we think is really good, which is 10 common mistakes parents make during the IEP meeting, 8 steps for better IEP meetings. And then we have some professional advocates, you know, myself from the National Down Syndrome Society. I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of IEPs. COPA and Yellow Pages for Kids' Rights Law has a lot of great resources that aren't super bogged down to read. And I encourage you to look through rights law and even print out an article if it's something that has been a point of contention with you and your IEP team in the past.
And it's a great idea not to do that the night before the IEP. Now, I personally always go back and reread these the night before just to keep them fresh. But when you're preparing for your IEP, you should be reading those things in advance. It's okay to read them again right before, but read those things in advance, so that you're not rushed. You take your time and really learn from them. And don't be afraid in the IEP meeting, if they are throwing around acronyms like they tend to do, that you say, stop, whoa, I didn't get that. What does that mean? Do not be afraid to ask what that means, because you can throw things right back at them about Down syndrome, and I guarantee they're going to be asking you what they mean.
So now we want to open it up. There's a chat bar on the side, so if you have any questions, I would encourage you to type them in, and Robin, Betsy, and I will do our best to answer them. So I'm going to give a few minutes for you to process everything and then to also type it into your chat bar. So one question just came in that says, if it's the first IEP and there's been no issues thus far and you expect no issues, should you bring a professional advocate?
I don't think there's ever a problem with bringing an advocate. What are your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I really encourage you always to bring an advocate. You know, whether that needs to be someone professional, if that's what you're comfortable with and that's what you think needs to happen to get what you need done, then I always encourage you to reach out.
Yeah, my comment with that, Sarah, is just because you're bringing an advocate doesn't mean it should be threatening. There's a thought. I had a really interesting IEP last week, and I was talking with a speech language pathologist, stopped me in the hallway afterwards, and it was kind of a whew. And she said, actually, they had me mixed up with someone else. Going into it, the entire group was ready for me to be really tough on them. And I think that I like to go into an IEP meeting planning on really reiterating that we're all there as a team and that I'm there to be a team player and to help everyone. I will typically bring some sort of a resource that the school can use. And we, Wisconsin Upside Down, we donate at least one resource to the school every time we go in, and just kind of set the stage that I'm not there to, again, we're not there to intimidate either. There's no reason that your advocate should be seen as a negative thing. An advocate should be a positive thing for everyone in the room. And I always just like to open up, as a parent, I would say just introduce your advocate and say why that person's your advocate. This has been my best friend since I was 3, and her opinion is really important to me. And I just think it'd be great to have another set of ears. She loves my daughter as if it was her own. Or this is so-and-so for my local Down syndrome organization. Since my daughter's only 3, I'm not a Down syndrome expert yet, so I brought someone who was that might be able to help us plan this. So yes, I would definitely always bring an advocate if you can.
I've also seen as students get older, I was working with a student who was in high school, and has been fully included all the way through, and she brought some of her best friends to the IEP meeting, and they talked about classes and how things were going and their friendships, and it was one of the most really meaningful IEPs I've ever seen because it really shows how important inclusion is. And it was amazing to see that student and her peers really lead the meeting in a way that typically the special ed director or the special ed teacher does. So there's all those. There's really there's no limitations on advocates. Bring them. They could be, again, like your students' best friends. I really, as Robin said, encourage you to bring an advocate with you. So it looks like that was the only question, but we threw a lot of information at you. So we're going to be putting up additional resources such as templates of the About Me pages and alongside with the webinars at ndss.org. Also contact me, Sarah Jo, if you have any questions, if you think late at night you're like, oh, I really wish I would have asked this. Or if you need some support with your IEP, and I also do district and educator training, so please contact me with that. And as Colleen said at the beginning, this was our first ever webinar for our monthly series from the NDSS Inclusive Education Task Force, and we'll be presenting monthly webinars for parents and guardians. So you can look out on social media for that. And I also wanted to let you all know that we have a paralleling series, a webinar series for educators about inclusion that starts on Friday, so look out for that as well. So now we're ready to step into the IEP room. So future webinars will cover the actual IEP meeting, communication between school and home, transitions, and other important IEP related issues. So Robin has, a wonderful, wonderful series she does. We have other experts from all over the country working with us to put on these webinars. So they're really full of wonderful information that is going to help you throughout the whole IEP process and beyond the IEP process. So I want to thank our Inclusive Education Task Force for their continued hard work and for Robin and Betsy for being our wonderful panelists, and I encourage everyone to follow NDSS on social media to keep up to date with these webinars, and please contact us at NDSS if you have any comments or questions. Thank you all for joining us.